Ezra Klein betrayed me. He backstabbed me. What an asshole. And then I read the article, and it was more about the Overton window than it was about any kind of specific Hasan Piker apologia, right?
Yeah.
But, I'm happy that you made the Fuentes analogy, because to me, what you stated, which I think is true, and it's time for me to burn my goodwill with your chat, I might view Fetterman's moderate concessions to MAGA as necessary to cool down the temperature of the country, whereas you're saying, no, we should be unapologetically progressive.
Yeah.
There are things we need
right
to get done now.
Yes. And you're here telling me that I'm crazy. I'm crazy as a Democrat for saying Fetterman bad, he's almost MAGA. It's just how most Pennsylvania Democrats think of Fetterman at this point. Again, I want to stress, minus 100 swing. And I want to address one of them. How you doing?
Just like, I don't know, man. I'm having like a really, really, really funny week. Can I share?
Yeah, bro. Sure.
Okay, so the Yes All Jews article, where it assigns collective guilt to the entirety of Jewish people for the sins of Zionism, has sparked an interesting perspective in my community. I think it's interesting or whatever, where on one hand, I think the libertarian mentality is to reject collective guilt. And I feel like that mentality has become prevalent in the past few years, where the progressive collective guilt arguments have kind of been rejected. But I do think it's funny to say, no, let's steelman the collective guilt argument, but then let's figure out the rules. That way we can hold everybody collectively guilty for the sins of their people. And that's been really the memes that I've been playing with. But how are you doing, and what's hot on your radar?
So you just want to start talking about Jews and gloss over the fact that you have no beard?
Well, I mean, yeah.
Well, no. Well, first of all, yeah, good to see you. Everything's great. Everything's wonderful. No, I saw like Wick had a panel with Doobie on that. Doobie, who of course we're employed by.
Yes.
You and me, we're both fellow employees. But no, I heard like some excerpts that sound like a totally unhinged and non-standard opinion on Jews' complicity in the Gazan genocide and related activities. I don't think that is an accurate assessment of where the left generally is at. And if it is, it's of a small minority of incredibly ideologically suspect left-wing people.
Can I try to steelman it for you? So arguably, based off of the stats that we were looking at, 40% of people identify as Zionist. And that basically of like Jews internationally or whatever. So that means not only do they support the existence of the nation state of Israel, but they might even support expansion into the West Bank, Gaza, southern Lebanon, etc. They might even support expansion past that. But if you poll Jews on whether or not they want the nation state of Israel to exist, that polls at like 88%. And so the accusation from the article is that effectively like 90% of Jews approximately support the existence of the nation state of Israel, which by itself is let's just call it a problematic concept. And then out of the anti-Zionists, which would make up the remaining 12%, what the author asserts is that half of that approximately are quote unquote anti-Zionists, but they're liberal anti-Zionist. So that means that they want the nation state of Israel to continue to exist. They're just critics of its current expansion, and they don't want them to expand into the West Bank, Gaza, southern Lebanon, etc. And so the steelman, this person did say some pretty wild shit, but the steelman of the perspective is effectively that like that means that 95% of Jews are complicit in the crimes of the nation state of Israel, and therefore, until more people are rejecting the project of the nation state of Israel, it's fair to paint Jews with a broad brush.
I mean, I obviously disagree with that. Did you mean liberal Zionists when you said that denominator there, or one of the percentages? Or did you mean liberal anti-Zionists?
Yes, so 88% in general like support the nation state of Israel, whereas half of the people are liberal anti-Zionists, which is what I mean, which are people who don't want this would apply to Ethan Klein, because Ethan Klein he identifies himself as an anti-Zionist.
Oh, really?
Because he rejects the expansion of the nation state of Israel, and he views himself as an ardent critic of the current government, but he also wants the current nation state of Israel to continue to exist. And so that's what the article accused half of quote unquote anti-Zionists being.
Interesting. First of all, before we move on, I just have to a bunch of my comments. I don't know why everyone is like horny this morning, but everyone's saying that you look amazing. Did you put on bronzer? Faith Adams says, Connor, you look great. Connor sounds so smart when he says nation state. My chat has never been more pro Connor than it is right now. You're blushing. You're blushing. Holy shit.
I am. So I've gone swimming on the weekends. I have a YMCA membership, so I have been getting a little bit more sun. And then I did forget what my face looked like without like a giant bushy beard, so I trimmed it. It's not horrible. It's not my favorite, to be honest. I'm probably growing out the beard again, but I do think that
men never get compliments. This is why men never get compliments. You're not ready for this. You weren't prepared for that.
No, I love compliments. So it's okay. I'll ruin my goodwill with your community shortly. So
okay,
let's continue to talk until I ruin that goodwill.
My response to that is like, I think it's stupid that we would attribute people who like support the country of Israel as necessarily supportive of all the actions of its country, and that's including even, I guess, in that 91% or whatever the percentage was, some of the most ardent Jewish critics of the genocide, of war, of all, et cetera, of expansion, let alone anything else. So we don't really talk that way. I think maybe some lefties do, about collective responsibility vis-a-vis like America, for example. I'm sure if you polled most Americans, they would tell you, like, in general, we support America as a nation, America as a country, or as an ideal or something. And no one would say, well, therefore, what I would reject people who say we're complicit in all of its actions. Even those of us who are like against Trump and shit, you know.
This was so common in the political zeitgeist in the late 10s and early 20s. I kind of want to ask you about this. There was a push for, let's say, with the Me Too movement and rape culture, for like to say, okay, yeah, sure, most men are not like forcible rapist criminals, but there's a sick subculture of men who act predatory towards women, and they do not get called out by their peers because it's viewed like a sport, I suppose, to like try to manipulate women into promiscuous sex, even if you're lying or even if you get them drunk or whatever. And so it's incumbent upon men as a gendered class to call out predatory behavior within their community, even if they're not a part of the or even if they themselves do not predate. They cannot be neutral in the face of predatory behavior. And so that argument, if we...
Yeah, but they're not, right? I mean, the percentage of that you just described, you know, and included people who were against. It would be like saying, yes, all men, even the men who call out the abuses of like Weinstein or whatever the fuck, right? So like, we're putting into that category. Well, hold on.
So let's not necessarily go with the argumentation of the article. What I'm actually asking you is what's your line? So for instance, like if we took this from an analogy standpoint, and let's just forget because the Jewish example is so spicy, let's just take it, let's go with like sex, or let's go with systemic racism or something. Mm-hmm. So if you were, I'll bring up two examples, but I'll try to make them brief. If you were a man and you had a friend who lied constantly in order to get laid, right? He told women that, you know, he was 6 foot when he was really 5'10". He lied about how much money he made. He got them drunk. He took them to fancy restaurants where he worked so he could get a discount or some shit. And then he basically like slept with these women under false pretenses, and then he ditched them. Then if you weren't a misogynist, I would presume, even though you weren't engaging in the predatory behavior yourself, I think most people of good faith and good conscience would say, your friend's a shitbag. He's manipulating women into promiscuous sex under false pretense. And as a result, if you don't call him back, or if you don't call him out, you're complicit in his shitbaggery. And then quick, similar example. Let's say you're like a cop or something, and you have a guy who is like, he openly is just like, fuck the black community. This is where all the crime is. I'm going to patrol the fuck out of it. And every single person I can jam up on any crime, I'm going to fuck them, jam them up, because the blacks are the problem. Like,
Yeah.
if you don't, even if you're a good cop,
I'm not agreeing with that. I'm just acknowledging the hypothetical. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah. But even if you're a good cop yourself, if you don't call out that predatory behavior, then some people would accuse you of being complicit. And so I'm trying to ask you, where's your line between neutrality and complicity?
Yeah, no, I think that people do have affirmative obligations and duties to act beyond just their own conduct and to call certain things out. It really is contextual. I think in the context of like interpersonal stuff, I think that is probably better accomplished. And sometimes I'm like skeptical of the like public shaming or public displays or whatever, in the context of like something that could be resolved, not in the public sphere, and where actually maybe it's more likely that it will be. But that might be different if there's like a widespread pattern of criminal activity, or if it reaches a certain threshold, or if we're talking about police conduct, right? Where that's something that you want to report to internal affairs or whatever, because what you're talking about there is like racist activity, et cetera, et cetera. So my intuition about the affirmative duty to report might, and what that looks like, might be different as between different conduct in different environments. And even like interpersonally, I can imagine it reaching a threshold where you would make a long Twitter thread or make a report to the police, etc. It really, I know this is so annoying, but I think it really, really does depend.
Yeah, unfortunately, you have too sane of an answer. We had like we were on Prime last night debating this, and so my real position is probably your position. That obviously, like, context matters, responsibility matters. Are you a public servant? Are you a civilian? Are you complicit through your inaction? Is this an associate? Is this a friend? Like, all these variables have to be calculated out for what your degree of complicity is within the action. But what was funny is that I feel like Doobie, in an attempt to steelman, no offense, Doobie, but in an attempt to steelman the argument, he was effectively saying like, no, this is so bad. Like the war crimes or genocide in Gaza is so bad. The annexation of southern Lebanon is so bad. Bibi Netanyahu, there was even a quote in the article where Bibi Netanyahu, he doesn't recognize the West Bank as sovereign Palestinian territory.
Yeah, of course.
He's calling it Judea and Samaria. Yes. And he's saying, not only are we not going to listen to international pressure, we're not even going to listen to domestic pressure. We're not even going to listen to our own citizens who don't want to expand into the West Bank. We're going into the West Bank. And so Doobie is saying that this is so egregious and comparable to the sins of settler colonialism of the 1500s through 1900s, that if we don't take effectively what would be like an anti-Nazi stance in the early 20th century, then we're complicit in this project. So
if we don't say yes, all Jews were complicit in the project, is that the claim, or is it basically the claim that
more like not doing the kind of sweeping that I'm guilty of? So for instance, like I can't defend the annexation of southern Lebanon, but my instinct, of course, is to say, oh, well, there were rocket attacks from southern Lebanon and blah, 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 blah. And this is why Israel's doing it. And the Litani River is a clear border that establishes something firm between them and Lebanon. But realistically, like, even if I do that, Steelman, what are we really talking about? We're talking about military armed forces invading a sovereign neighbor and then kicking out, I think, 600,000 members of an ethno-religious group based off of their religion, and then saying those people can only come back with the explicit permission of the state. That's ethnic cleansing.
Oh yeah, right? Sure. It's a second Nakba.
Yeah, but because of the post-World War II sympathetic history of the Zionist project and the Holocaust, there's a instinct from Westerners, Zionist sympathetic Westerners, including myself, to try to steelman it. Whereas, let's say this was happening in Sudan, then we would be like, what the fuck? Like, ethnic cleansing is fucked. We don't care what your geographic, justification for it is. You can't do this shit. There wouldn't even be an attempt to steelman it.
I'm not sure that there wouldn't be an attempt in other contexts. Maybe it wouldn't have been. There wouldn't be as a concerted propaganda effort within Western society to have a conversation about it. But there's just less conversation about some of these contexts in general, and that has been noted oftentimes by both Israel critics in terms of what's the term they have, the Hasbara situation, but also
Hasbara propaganda.
You're of Israel defenders.
This morning, by the way, do you need to go drink a white monster or something? Like, do you need some prescription amphetamines? Like what?
So basically, I told you that my chat is calling you handsome. Now you're coming at me for being too sane, and the implication is, of course,
no, I'm expecting you to come in with like a progressive elbow and go, that's what I was expecting. So
I've never been one of these like idpol people who think that it makes sense either from just like a rhetoric perspective or from like a collective guilt perspective to say things like, yes, all Jews. You might be saying something like, no, actually, what I'm communicating is something super important. I'm just trying to bring attention to a problem that is particularly true among the Jewish community. And but that's not what people are hearing. What people are hearing is that all Jews in some way are complicit in Israel's actions. And I just think that is a form of collective punishment that in general, I find anti-Semitic. I don't think it's true that we would ascribe moral culpability on the basis of your religion to all Jews. And you can try to slice it up and dice it and make it, try to explain as much as possible and just say, well, no, would we ever say not all Germans when it came to, the Holocaust or something? Actually, there were some Germans who defected. There were some Germans who weren't complicit in the Holocaust. And I don't have a problem with you saying, dissecting historically and saying, well, this is what happened. And there was this event and then the Holocaust happened. I thought one of the critiques of I don't know, and I certainly am not a revisionist, but one of the critiques from the perspective of a lot of lefties and doubters of this collective memory or this very flattened and sterile discourse about the Holocaust is precisely that, is the lack of context, the lack of, critical analysis, and the basically just repeating of 6 million Jews died and it was awful and that's it. I don't even necessarily agree with that critique, but if you're coming from the leftist perspective, I think you should be sensitive to the fact that a lot of conversations require nuance and context to get to the bottom of stuff.
I appreciate your sanity. I'm going to steelman Doobie one more time, but unfortunately you're being too sane for me to disagree with actively. So what he brought up was that denazification in Germany post-World War II was effectively cultural collective punishment. And we don't really criticize that collective attempt because we basically say that the Nazis were so dominant culturally in Germany that even if you were neutral or ambivalent or even tepidly hostile, but you didn't do anything about it, then you still share some level of national collective responsibility for the sins of the Holocaust. And so if we're okay with the attempts of denazification in Germany, why wouldn't we have a similar attitude to de-Zionism in reference to the nation state of Israel? Because the expansionist project in particular, like taking over Gaza, expanding into the West Bank, and also taking southern Lebanon up to the Litani River, this is ethnic cleansing. So why are we tolerating it? Why are we sanitizing it? Why are we steelmanning it? Because they're our ally and bad shit happened to Jews 80 years ago. And I agree with the instinct to protect the sovereignty and sanctity of the individual. But I do think that these arguments are at least interesting.
I mean, they're interesting insofar as this person was unhinged when she titled her article and then wrote her article. I mean, that's interesting to me. But this can go both ways. If you want to start talking about collective responsibility, and that's essentially the justification for the conduct in Gaza and the bombing of individuals in Gaza. And you can say all you want. Oh, the election was in 2006. Oh, no, actually, it's not clear to me that the people pre October 7th were so disgruntled with Hamas that it really was not a fair representation of the viewpoints of a lot of Gazans, or at a bare minimum that it would be so unlike the Nazi situation in terms of the connection between the people and their leaders. And it's certainly like after the Nazis gained power and the Enabling Act and whatsoever, there weren't like free and fair elections in Germany. It's not so simple for Germans to leave their own society. Not everyone has a cousin in another country and has an ability to exit, or many of them were prisoners in their own country. And there was obviously like a great deal of issues with representation in Nazi Germany and having free and fair elections, whatever. So I think the analogy breaks down, and then you have to like rewind the clock of like, well, who started it? And that to me is like, okay, an exercise in futility, and that's just loading a bunch of other normative questions that are hotly debated. And so why even just talk about these like collective guilt stuff? It's easier for me to just focus on the beliefs and attitudes and perspectives of individuals, or you can speak of them collectively, but only in so much as they share a common vision or worldview. When it comes to culpability,
you're being too sane. You're being too sane for me to attack. So I guess what I would say is we could dance around this for a little bit. I do think it's the discourse du jour. So if you had any like insights or particular things that you wanted to share, unfortunately, I think my meme position is let's do the collective responsibility thing. That way I can like fuck with Prime, and like every time he comes on my show I can be like, apologize for black criminality, and then when like a Jewish person comes onto my show I can be like, apologize for Zionism.
You tell Prime to apologize for black criminality, guys. So you don't. Anyone who doesn't know who Prime is, Prime is a black guy. He's like a political commentator and he hosts panels.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, has no criminal record. Why do you give Prime responsibility for black?
No, that's what I'm saying. I can use the collective guilt argument to say he's neutral in the face of disproportionate black criminality. And I can say, Pisco, apologize for the racist casta system in South America.
Oh, yeah.
Apologize for the racial hierarchy in Central and South America. And then I can try to hold you collectively responsible for that. That's funny to me.
To the extent that somebody is like articulating a view which has led to certain results in the past, I don't think it's unfair for you to be like, you are spreading the ideology that X, Y, or Z, right? You are spreading MAGA ideology. You're spreading the ideology that imprisoned millions of, liberals and anti-communists in these different societies. So if someone is articulating a worldview or a set of propositions that have like a track record of bad shit in the past, I don't have a problem with you doing that. What I have a problem with is like going after Prime for black crime because he's black.
That's the meme position.
Okay,
my real position is your position. I'm doing the meme position hopefully to demonstrate its absurdity, but it is funny. It is funny to think about like hanging out with your black friends and going out for a beer and being like, apologize. And then like, they can be like, no, you apologize. And then, you just fight about whose people are collectively more guilty of social sins.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to address what Doobie is offering super chats in my chat, saying it's not really, she's calling, sorry, this doesn't really work because what she's calling out isn't Israel. She's attacking the normalization of the Zionist ideology within the Jewish community, which she sees as inherently evil. You can say that, but the term "yes, all Jews," I don't think accurately conveys that view. And secondly, I think that I take the kind of Ezra Klein view that even though we're against ethnostates, etc., and I'm not a Zionist, I'm not committed to a homeland in Palestine for Jewish people, and I take that to be the kind of Zionist view. Ethnostates are kind of like not uncommon in the world in some ways, right? Connor advocates for a pseudo ethnostate in the United States of America, at least to have ethnicity as a consideration for immigration. You see all sorts of angst in Western society about the ethnic makeup of immigration. And so there is this kind of exceptionalism. Yeah, I'm not committed to Zionism as a project. I'm not committed to a Jewish state inherently as an ethnic or religious matter. But I don't think that this is some like insane thing that's only true of the Jewish community. That's not true of other societies.
Now, that weirdly enough, that actually tangents into another thing that I wanted to talk to you about. So Ezra Klein is a huge fan of my show, watches it all the time. Okay, and he wrote an article that said Hasan Piker is not the enemy. Okay, and that got a lot of rage clicks to the point that they changed the title, which was unfortunate because they got me to click on it through the rage clicks of the title. Now, what he actually said in the article, he didn't defend Hasan Piker, steel manning or sympathizing with, 20th century Soviet Russia or CCP. They didn't talk about, in my opinion, the whitewashing of the Uyghur cultural genocide in Xinjiang province. Didn't briefly mention the terrorist apologia. But what he really said is that the gatekeepers can no longer gatekeep. Popular people in alternative media are popular whether we like them or not. If we reject people who are popular, even if we despise their political views, then effectively all we're really doing is we're excluding ourselves from the zeitgeist and the national conversation.
Yeah.
And so if there's people that you are hostile to ideologically, then you don't have to platform them if you don't want to, but you should in general take it as a rule.
I felt so fucking seen, Connor. I felt so seen. Wow. Isn't this what I've been saying for like months and months and months? I felt so heard, so seen by Ezra. It was like
that's why it felt like a betrayal.
All the bullies are being,
because I was like, no, Ezra, you were the chosen abundance liberal.
It was completely reasonable.
To destroy the communists, not join them.
It was such a reasonable article, and I felt so seen and heard. Like the bullies were making fun of me, and I was running home, and then Ezra looked at everyone and said, "How dare you? This is my son." And I felt so like, 100%. He alluded to the William F. Buckley debates and stuff. And you don't have to...
With the Black Panther that he then had at his house in order to have dinner with him after they had a vicious debate.
Yeah. And for months and months and months, people are like, Pisco sweeping for Hasan, Pisco sweeping for Hasan, Pisco sweeping for Hasan. I essentially have the same view as Ezra on the issue that like people aren't engaging in the same question, and it's just a kind of elaboration of Hasan bad, and that's the performative thing they want to hear. And now that it's Ezra, Connor says, don't worry, Ezra's not really sweeping for Hasan. I don't think he's sweeping for Hasan. I think he's really reasonable. The title triggered me.
To be clear, I was actually so what happened is I felt like the title was pretty sweepy and I was ready to be angry, right? Like I was like, Ezra Klein betrayed me. He backstabbed me. What an asshole. And then I read the article and it was more about the Overton window than it was about any kind of specific Hasan Piker apologia, right?
Yeah.
But I think that you've probably taken a healthy chunk of shit for things that are correlated with what I'm saying, but not necessarily what I'm saying. So for instance, like with the Vanguard, my accusation hasn't been like, never talk to the Vanguard ever. It's be more mean to the Vanguard because they're fucking tanky apologists. It's basically just be more mean. That's really the criticism.
Okay, no, on that front, I'm fine with people saying confront them more, be more mean or whatever, and like challenge them more or whatever, and we can have a conversation about who does and doesn't do that for sure. And I agree that that there's sometimes people who are pushovers and basically do nothing to articulate a contrary view when they have to. And this is my critique of Gavin Newsom when he had on Charlie Kirk and when he had on Steve Bannon. It was my critique of Cenk Uygur when he's bringing on, or talking to people like Tucker Carlson or Marjorie Taylor Greene and being like, we're all just friends here, right? And making common cause with them. And so I understand that criticism. I respect that criticism. What I don't respect is Pisco's a grifting piece of shit. He just wants the money. He wants the doobie bucks. And so that's why. And now when Ezra's saying it, when Tim Miller from the Bulwark is saying it, like we're all just kind of
Tim.
What?
Sorry, continue.
We're all just kind of taking the position of, or at least this is my interpretation, and I'll be so bold as to try to summarize the position, and then you can respond to it. Something like, okay, we disagree with Hasan. Does that mean that we have to do X, Y, or Z? Does it mean we can't be on a show with him, and in what context? But like, That's what I think is the more uncertain question, and one which people, I think, oftentimes refuse to articulate.
I've boiled this argument down into a binary that I think could have saved us 20 hours of discourse, but of course we don't make a lot of money off of like a 2-minute solution, off of a 2-minute flowchart. So the flowchart is this simple, in my opinion. So and Tim Miller did feel a little sweepy, and I appreciated Destiny for confronting him. However, the flowchart is this simple. In a general election, in reference to canvassing, phone banking, fundraising, etc., does Hasan Piker have a more net benefit for the anti-MAGA coalition, where he brings in more voters than he drives away through his extreme positions, or is he so extreme that he drives away more moderates than he attracts through fundraising, canvassing, et cetera, et cetera? And I think that the anti-Hasan critics, including myself, are saying instinctively, we believe that he drives away more moderates than he attracts out of new voters, progressives, young voters, et cetera, et cetera. But the truth is, I don't think we have the data on it.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it's kind of an empirical question, and we all have our intuitions, and I respect that, because sometimes I have a strong intuition, and I'm not saying that you should never rely on your intuition or anything like that. But at the end of the day, that's kind of like an empirical question, and to me, a less interesting one. That's just basically saying, in the abstract, would we rather have Hasan or not have Hasan? That's kind of like what's on offer there. But like, as far as I know, no one's proposing to kill Hasan. No one's proposing to deplatform Hasan. Or maybe they are. I don't know.
No, it's how you approach him. And this was the Wick panel with Destiny and some other characters. I forget who the other characters were, but I think the answer to that question, don't kill Hasan or deplatform Hasan, but I think it's a matter of approach. So for instance, there was that progressive, he was either like a mayor or a state rep or something, I forget, in Michigan, and he went with Hasan for some canvassing events or something. And so the question,
the Michigan Senate primary candidate, I forget his name, Al Said, is that right?
I forget his name as well. But then the question becomes like, okay, so we're talking about like electoral effectiveness of either having him or not having him. If you're Wick or me or Destiny or any of the Hasan critics, and you think that he's a net negative for electoral politics, then the position is, you take advantage of him for like canvassing and fundraising, but effectively if somebody asks you about him, then you disavow him, you criticize his most extreme positions, you kind of say he's a piece of shit. So it's a one-way street where he's helping you, but you're not helping him. Whereas if it's, this is the other binary. If you actually think that he's a net positive and you're going to attract more people than you repulse, then you say, oh yeah, like I don't agree with all, like you basically canvass with him, you treat him as a friend, but then you say, yeah, I don't believe with all his spicy things, but he's a live streamer and live streamers say spicy stuff, but realistically he's trying to do a good thing and I want to encourage him in that. And so it's kind of more of like a fraternal perspective than an enemy or rival perspective.
No, yeah, like my view on there could certainly be people who walk that path of saying, yeah, I'll use him for this, and I disavow these views, but he's a live streamer, etc., who try to make that explanation and are successful. I mean, Mom Donnie tried to walk that line, and here I'm not saying that Hasan was a necessary but-for condition for Mom Donnie's victory. I'm not an expert there. I'm not an expert also when it comes to deciding what's electorally smarter or dumber. I have my own views on that, but the proof is kind of in the pudding. The fact that politicians are reaching out to Hasan and want to use his platform, to me, indicates that they feel that there's some benefit to be gained there. You know, Gavin Newsom was asked this. He said he would do it. Other candidates that span from both left to centrist said they would. Some said they wouldn't, right? Ruben Gallego said that he wouldn't. I think Cory Booker said no, right? So let the candidates decide what they think is going to be valuable or not, or what kind of position that they can carve out. And although my intuition is that they want to get involved more with online stuff, even small stuff. You know, I had Mark Kelly on, and we talked to Mark Kelly for
what the fuck?
Yeah, maybe you missed this. Yeah, Soy Pill and I.
No, I'm very jealous of your networking. You are like, I'm like over here like, disavow Crystal Ball now, disavow Kyle Kalinske now, and you're like talking to fucking Mark Kelly and shit. Damn, your networking game is on point.
But Mark Kelly didn't, I'm sure, read a huge dossier on Pisco and Soy Pill and Mr. Bead or anything. And I'm sure that this is like a very minor thing, but it's like one additional thing, right? And if they thought it was valuable enough out of a busy U.S. senator to spend 38 minutes with us shitheads, I'm assuming that they're going to see some value in an audience that's, I don't know, orders of magnitude bigger. So just let the candidates decide. And in terms of, I think what people are worried about is promulgating or increasing Hasan Piker's like power over policy or the direction of the party. And I just don't think we're in any danger of him doing that. I don't think that he's being used, I think, and maybe that this will give him some influence in the future, but I don't think it will change the Democratic Party into like a Marxist-Leninist party. That's just my view, though. I don't think there's much of a risk there.
Yeah, I obviously have that concern, and I've articulated that concern in the past, that the giga progressive, lefty, anti-Zionist, communist simp groups that kind of get like swept for as a part of like the dirtbag left or the far left of the Democratic Party. I'm worried that they have a increasingly louder voice, not only in online politics, but also in the pop culture zeitgeist. So I am worried about it. I think that's why I criticize it so fiercely. But also, I kind of took this attitude when I was working with PV, because I took a lot of shit because Vosh was a part of PV and he had his like little, folder drama, and Destiny was a part of PV. And obviously he's quite a controversial figure. But like, the truth is, like, for me, the calculus really boiled down to, in 2024, are we getting votes on the table that would otherwise not exist? And through phone banking, through canvassing, through the canvassing houses, through the canvassing events, the answer seemed like yes. And so all of the optical considerations and the zeitgeist considerations were secondary compared to the electoral considerations. And so I think I'm taking a similar attitude now, even though I don't like it. If Hasan did do, let's say he did like a massive fundraiser, the same way Digital Ground Game did a massive fundraiser and they raised $250,000. So let's say Hasan did a massive fundraiser, $250,000, $500,000.
Sure.
And then he actually used that fundraiser in order to deploy canvassers and phone bankers in order to have a positive effect on the 26 or 28 election. I still think he's a massive dirtbag. I still don't want him to get a bigger grip in the national zeitgeist. I am worried that that effective political effort on his part is going to normalize him more in the political space. But ultimately, victory in 26 and 28 for an anti-Trump coalition is probably more important than me giving a fuck about my personal beef with Hasan Piker.
Well, I appreciate you saying that.
And that's kind of where I'm at, especially when the elections are coming up.
I appreciate you saying that. But when people say like normalization, right? I understand that people like who have abhorrent views, or that have anti-liberal views or whatever kind of views, right? That there's this fear that will like quote unquote legitimize them by putting them into either positions of authority or like being in a literal coalition with them. In the example, for example, of Israel, right? A lot of these views of the Ben Gavirs, these Kahanist types, were considered marginal in Israeli society. But look what you've done. You've let them into the literal government coalition of the government in Israel. And so I understand that fear for sure of giving legitimacy, quote unquote, either public legitimacy or whatever. However, we have to deal with the reality, and I think people don't appreciate this when they do the comparison between Fuentes and Hasan Piker. That I'm sorry, Fuentes is just more of a reputational risk than Piker is, and there isn't this like understanding of American society of who Hasan Piker is, such that there are like these fully formed and fleshed out ideas to normalize to the public, right? We understand some of his views, right? We know some of the lore, what have you, right? But it's not clear that most Americans are interacting with or thinking about those views in the past and are happy to like put it to the side and say, well, everyone has some skeletons in their closet. And so the normalization stuff, I think, only operates if people are like consciously aware of what it is they're normalizing or who they're normalizing and legitimizing. And it doesn't really have the same effect if you found out about it after and then everyone just disavows, like Mamdani disavows it, like the 9/11 comment, etc. Then you're really not normalizing the views. Maybe you're normalizing the figure, but we're kind of in like a post-cancellation, not 100%, see Eric Swalwell, etc. But we are largely, from the ideas perspective and from the sketchy clip perspective, the juicy comment perspective, a little bit post-cancellation, aren't we?
I think so. I also think that that's a positive social development. I think that the liberals and libertarians who were arguing against the leftists in late 10s and early 20s, effectively saying that there's going to be a blowback effect against gatekeeping national discourse. I think they were ultimately vindicated through the purchase of Twitter by Elon Musk and the dissident right wing seizing a healthy chunk of national discourse through social media manipulation and the Trump administration. But I do want to bring up the fact that I'm happy that you made the Fuentes analogy, because to me, what you stated, which I think is true, and it's time for me to burn my goodwill with your chat. You stated that you don't think that Hasan has the same negative effect on canvassing efforts, on candidates,
reputational risk. Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately for me, that is true, because the truth is that people just don't revile him the same way that they do Nick Fuentes, because Fuentes is more of like an obvious villain, I suppose.
Yeah, how do you deal with that, right? It reminds you a little bit of like the Luigi Mangione situation, where we can all be like, murderer, he's this or that. But like, if you pull on Luigi Mangione, you will find an upsetting amount of people perhaps don't really view him the same way.
They were like,
do.
Yeah, it's bad, but I get it. And by the way, my wife was one of those people.
Oh, wow.
I was arguing, and she's
Nobody clipped that. Nobody clipped that.
She's a shit lib too. So like, it was kind of wild to have like a brunch wine mom shit lib being like, yeah, murder's bad, but I get it, And I was like, whoa, like that's a little spicy.
Right. And so people, can I just pause with that? And I will let you elaborate.
Sure.
But like, that I think frustrates people, that Hasan isn't on the same level in terms of reputational risk as someone like Nick Fuentes, but that's just like a reality.
Right. But that's what I was going to say is, if it seems like I'm more chill in this conversation with the electoral analysis, I think it's only because while my instinct is that he could be a net negative effect, I don't have any hard data to back up my perspective. It's all instincts, it's all vibes. And then also, I'll admit, it is I view Hasan Piker similarly to Nick Fuentes in his level of extremity and simping for authoritarian governments. But I understand that I'm in like, at least on the internet, I'm in an opinionated minority, right? When I talk to basically anybody who's vaguely familiar with Hasan Piker's content, they don't say his 5 worst clips. They don't say, America deserved 9/11, baby settlers, dog shocking controversy, Hezbollah's flag is super cool. They don't hit me with like a half dozen like really bad talking points. What they say is like, oh, Hasan Piker, the guy who wants universal health care and social democratic policies. Like that's the general vibe, is like, why don't you like universal health care? Why don't you like Palestinian justice for Palestinians? And so I feel like that's part of the nefarious level of Hasan Piker, is I think he hides behind these like more benign policy prescriptions and reputation while still having some pretty nefarious views. But I also understand that I'm in the minority in that perception.
Right. Yeah. I think you would actually have to start explaining to people, no, this is why Hasan's so bad, because he was on the Decoding podcast and he said he was going to hide his views. And this is what Marxist-Leninists do. Oh, you don't know what a Marxist-Leninist is? A Marxist-Leninist is so. I gotta do like a 10,000 word thesis paper on why Hasan's bad. Yeah, right. So I don't think people are have that same kind of visceral reaction as they do with hearing like, oh, he's a Holocaust denier. Oh, he like is anti-Semitic, right? And the anti-Semitism accusations on Hasan are just not landing. I want to just reply real quick to a super chat. It says, quick reminder, liberals were the most responsible for SJW cancel culture of the 2010s, the I'm with her crowds. I mean, I don't have a polling on that, but I don't deny that a lot of liberals are responsible for that. No doubt about that. I'm just not among them. I was against, I'm in favor of the, I'm with her, the kind of look at how powerful people were manipulating women, etc. But in terms of the identity politics, that's something that I don't associate with as much. I was certainly against that. And then
I remember an anecdote that you shared a couple of years ago where you were taking shit for insufficiently, I forget what like minority community it was, but there was like a minority community that was catching like a shitload of flack, and you weren't leaning into the identity politics enough. And some of your progressive friends were like, fuck Pisco, he's a Nazi.
I remember
that being part of your lore.
In college, I was in favor of white people being able to wear sombreros, and I was watching like the same YouTube content people were, where people were like, wow, how can you have dreadlocks if you're a white guy? And this is cultural appropriation. And I thought that was all like stupid and stuff. And so I got labeled a reactionary for those kinds of views. But back to the Hasan question. Yeah, so I just view that as obvious, and people might be frustrated by the difference in how he's received, but that will influence how Democratic candidates are willing to engage and on what level, and it might be rational for them to do so. And that might have the like negative effect of bolstering Hasan's credibility, but I continue to maintain, and maybe it's my intuition, maybe I don't really have an appreciation for the risk, that there's not really an appreciable risk that Hasan is going to turn every Democratic insider into a fellow traveler. I don't price in that risk as particularly high.
Okay. Well, let me press you on content that I haven't had the opportunity to watch yet. So prior to the Hasan question being taken over by the WIC TV panel, and prior to the Yes, All Jews article kind of commanding our attention for a few days, there was a Live and Learn episode where apparently the spiciest element of it was that a majority of the panel, I think, said that they would prefer Fetterman over Hasan Piker as president or something like that. Yeah. But then I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that you said, no, Hasan is actually demonstrably better than Fetterman.
Yeah, I stand by that.
So could you articulate that? Because I think I could actually press you on that a little bit.
Sure, yeah. So my view on these presidential questions is always with the caveat that there's constraints, and that's in any of these situations when you're doing like Vance versus Newsom, etc. Or like an out there one, Mussolini versus non-Mussolini, that we're thinking about a presidency with constraints, the normal constraints. If you're trying to do a like for like comparison, okay, the fact that Mussolini is Italian or that Hitler is German or whatever, you have to kind of price in the normal sets of constraints for someone like him, and maybe even buff him a little bit on the America side of stuff. It's going to be anachronistic the farther away you are from the American context, but that just to give you an understanding of how I view the hypothetical. On the Fetterman stuff specifically, it's important to see how I view the presidency and how I view Fetterman versus Hasan. I view Fetterman as essentially like one step away from MAGA. I don't think it's or impossible, I should say, that Fetterman actually switches party in the near future. I think that that's a distinct possibility. And we've already seen Democrats switch parties or at least become independent in recent memory. And so it's a track record that I'm familiar with. In terms of what I would expect Fetterman to continue the war. These are tangible things that there would be differences on. Okay.
Ooh. Okay.
Fetterman would continue the war against Iran. Hasan would not. Agreed?
I actually haven't seen Fetterman's commentary on the Iranian war, but I do remember that during the post October 7, 2023 shit,
he supports Epic Fury. He supports Epic Fury.
Apologetic, giga Zionist.
Yeah. So Fetterman is on the record. He supports Epic Fury. He supports the war. So that's a tangible, concrete thing. Hasan would get us out of the war. It's an illegal war. It's something. So given my view that this war is one of the worst things that Trump has done, and illegal to boot in terms of we're in a constitutional crisis right now because of this war, and additionally all the bad geostrategic effects, the economic effects, that is a concrete thing that Hasan would do differently than John Fetterman. Another example.
Okay.
In terms of the court, I would expect Fetterman to appoint some douchebag to the Supreme Court and be generally unwilling to do the kind of like court reform stuff, structural reforms that Hasan probably would be more willing to do. Hasan probably would be more willing to put on the agenda, like packing the court, which I think needs to be done. Hasan would probably be more willing to do things like giving Puerto Rico the vote, giving more votes to like Washington, D.C., these kinds of things. So that's another concrete thing where Fetterman would be like, no, but my rules, but my norms and things, like, no, I want those things to be changed for the betterment of the democracy in the long run. Hasan is closer to where I am in terms of healthcare policy, I think, than John Fetterman. John Fetterman, I think, who is weak by comparison and also doesn't have the power in terms of his persuasive ability among just in terms of competency. I think, not that Hasan is some great savant or some great communicator or whatever. I just would view that it's more likely on healthcare for Hasan to get his way. And then finally, in terms of culture war stuff, I view Hasan, this is an area where Fetterman isn't quite as crazy as his pro-Israel takes, as his MAGA apologia, et cetera, et cetera. But even there, I think Hasan is like more aligned. And so given that, and given the fact that I don't feel like we're in a risk of Hasan putting in place a Marxist Leninist society in the United States, I think the constraints would stop him so far as he tried to do that. I would prefer Hasan. Hasan would not be my first choice in a primary. That much is clear. I think Hasan bad, Hasan bad, Hasan bad. I'm not saying I'm a Hasan stan at all. All I'm saying is, in this hypothetical that will never, ever exist, I think it's rational to prefer Hasan over Fetterman.
Okay. It's not as stupid as I want it to be. I wish you had just said some blindingly stupid shit so I could attack you again. Unfortunately, you're being too sane again today.
Thank you.
The hypothetical, taking the hypothetical on its face, presuming the checks on power, but also presuming there's sufficient popularity to partially execute an agenda, et cetera, et cetera. I think that your Fetterman criticisms seem accurate based off of what I know of Fetterman. And then I think that your Hasan pros of ending the war, being aggressive about court packing and or reforms necessary to secure, in my opinion, a more progressive society, but you think these are necessary to secure the republic. Mm-hmm. He would be infinitely more aggressive about universal health care. And then in reference to the culture war, he would be unapologetically liberal, or I know he hates the word liberal, but he would be unapologetically progressive instead of tepidly,
I know what you mean. Yep.
Let's make concessions to the far right because we have to bring them on board.
100%. Okay. And just one last,
that's fine.
Well, one last thing, and then I'll let you respond. On immigration, too. Sure. Right? Fetterman voted for the Lincoln Riley Act. Fetterman is an ICE supporter. I think ICE needs to be abolished. All right. This is from a liberal perspective. ICE needs to be abolished. I actually don't agree with Mark Kelly said something like, we need to rebuild ICE from the ground up. I think that is, even that is a capitulation, I think. And even though I think that's better than a lot of the rhetoric that's on offer by certain more centrist Democrats, I think that, and so I think it's decent. I don't think it goes far enough. And so in terms of immigration, where I think a lot of the constitutional deprivations have been the worst, Hasan clearly would be better than John Fetterman. Last thing, I mean, Fetterman voted for Pam Bondi. What are we talking about? I mean, he's voting for Mark Wayne Mullen. He is voting for Trump appointees. This is insane shit. And so given my views that are, anti-MAGA, I think people shouldn't be surprised that I would prefer Hasan. I mean, I would prefer, obviously, like Mark Kelly to Hasan. I would prefer a bunch of centrist Dems to Hasan, but not Fetterman.
Yeah, I think people are used to me screaming at you, so I just want to make this clear to my audience real quick. I'm agreeing to the fact that I think Pisco is being descriptively accurate. I'm not necessarily saying that these are my personal preferences. Mm-hmm. So for instance, like when it comes to, I'm not like pro ICE shooting fucking people in the face casually and them not having any kind of accountability whatsoever. But in general, I mean, okay, dude, you would have to rewrite law enforcement escalation of force across the entirety of the country.
Let's not do this again.
That's not a specific ICE problem. But anyways, but in general, I'm for a secure border. I'm not for abolishing ICE. I'm not even really like for Mark Kelly redoing from the. I'm a lot more tepid about ICE than a lot of other people. Also, in reference to the culture war, I might view Fetterman's moderate concessions to MAGA as necessary to cool down the temperature of the country, whereas you're saying, no, we should be unapologetically progressive.
Yeah.
There are things
pause
we
right
need
there.
to get done now.
Yes.
Sure,
it's such an important point, right? Everyone agrees accountability is one of the most important things that we need to do. A lot of left-wing people agree with this. A lot of Democrats agree with this, that accountability is one of the most important things. Punishment, in other words, for actual things they did wrong in the previous administration. Who's more likely to give you punishment and accountability? Hasan Piker or Fetterman, the MAGA Trump dick suck, who's like, oh, they're just like you and me? No. Hasan would be more likely to give you accountability.
Yeah, he would let it all slide.
Yeah,
he would let it all slide. Then the healthcare thing, like I'm for like a multi-payer healthcare system, but you might want something a little bit more aggressive and universal. Then packing the courts, I'm actually in line with Fetterman that I want to maintain some degree of norms and decorum. I understand the arguments for packing the court or whatever. I just don't agree with them. And then continuing epic fury, I actually do think that that's relatively bad. It's not that I think deposing the Iranian regime, and if we were able to accomplish regime change with authorization from Congress,
if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If we could just do everything we want without consequence,
I'm extremely skeptical, especially after 2 decades of the war on terror, that we're going to be able to somehow rebuild a democratic, pseudo-secular, liberal Iranian, project that is friendly to the United States through an air campaign and blockade of the Hormuz. I don't think that that's going to happen. So it's not that I don't want the thing. I'm skeptical of our ability to achieve the thing.
Right. I also don't want Putin in power. I don't want the communist China.
Right, but that doesn't mean that I want to bomb. Like bombing Moscow would be funny. It also risks nuclear annihilation of the entire planet.
Funny until we all die. Yeah, no, that's what I mean.
Right, exactly. It would be until the tactical and strategic nuclear bombs are dropping on the United States. It would be funny. But the second they start dropping, it's not as funny.
Right. So, that's why I always hate it when people are like, what, you like the mullahs? You're in favor of women covering up? Like, no, you don't have to be in favor of the regime to be against what epic fury. And again, you might think differently, some of your audience, but if you take the view that I do, that the Iran war is like one of the worst things that Trump has done, 100%, then I think you would understand why for me, it's just like, it's not even a hard case, Fetterman versus Hasan in that.
Yeah, I want to hit you with a counterpunch that I actually did get from Hutch. I don't know if he forwarded it to you, but it's something that I added to my calculus that I had not previously considered. And I do want to read this from Relies on Bob for 5, because I think I can answer it on your behalf and you can clarify. So he says, do you think Fetterman has liberal values, ? And you assume that Hasan's Marxist-Leninism would just be blocked? I think the answer to that question is kind of and yes. So basically,
it depends what you mean by liberal values.
Liberal. Yeah, he's liberal in the sense that he likes a free society, but he's insufficiently progressive because he doesn't protect the freedom of minorities who are currently being fucked over by MAGA. And then I think part of your preamble was that you did think the Marxist-Leninist revolutionary shit would be checked by the system and kind of muted.
Yeah. I don't really think, because I think the courts and the military would not let it. Like the military in general in this country, even though there's this tradition of military not trying to get involved in politics, I think that's all great. Query whether they'll continue that tradition under the current leadership. Not to say anything, disparaging about the troops or whatever, but the troops are largely led by, and generals in the military occupy a more conservative, hierarchical system that I think is not amenable to the kind of, and I think you would see dissidents, and you'd be able to like call out when the shit was happening such that you could stop it. It reminds me a little bit of Pedro Castillo in Peru. Maybe I'm being too provincial about this, but like Pedro Castillo, it was him versus Fujimori in the election that occurred now, I think 4+ years ago in Peru. And Castillo was like a straight up communist associated with the Shining Path, etc. And he's related to this guy who wasn't able to run for president. And and he narrowly won. And when he said, "I'm closing Congress, dissolving Congress," everyone was like, "Lol, no, you're impeached, bro." And I kind of view, unless you've established this military and judicial, etc., institutional forces that I think Hasan probably would be too lazy to, it would be incredibly difficult. And now to say nothing about like state sovereignty in this context, right? You think Texas is going to go into the Marxist-Leninist night without a fight? You think this court's going to let it go in without a fight? And so all those institutional factors, I think it's just like obvious. It's not a huge risk. The question of liberalism, it just depends what you mean by liberalism. To me, it's a question of like degree, right? How much of a liberal are you? Not whether you are or not. I mean, that's just maybe a categorization thing that you can do at the once you've determined how much they are. But like, I think that Fetterman is somewhat liberal. I don't think that there's much danger of Fetterman turning this into a dictatorship, but I just don't think that there's much risk of Hasan Piker doing it either. At the end of the day, you have to question, like, would you vote for someone like Marco Rubio over Hasan? I don't think Rubio is going to turn this country into a fascist dictatorship. But really, you're going to support Rubio over Hasan in this context for all the other political reasons, notwithstanding the quote-unquote fact that Rubio might be more committed to the liberal framework? If the liberal framework is not really in as much danger from a Hasan-type force as it would be from a MAGA force, which I think we have shown that the liberal system is, even though it's surviving, and I think it will survive, I'm optimistic about that, it was in danger just of Orban-like figure. But if you take that view, I think the answer is obvious. You would pick Hasan Piker over Marco Rubio.
Let me burn more goodwill with your audience. So I'm sympathetic to the argumentation that my buddy North, the Never Trump Republican, made, which is effectively that Marco Rubio has sullied himself by being complicit in the crimes of the Trump administration, and therefore he should not be taken seriously. However, if let's say that he had not been part of the Trump administration and in fact even disavowed the Trump administration and effectively remained Fast and Bulbous says, can a ninja get another effectively? I just gave you another effectively. So if he had effectively remained a 2015, 2016 never Trump Marco Rubio, then I actually think the calculus would be clear that he would be preferable to Hasan Piker. But I want an opportunity to articulate this. So with Fetterman, like I said, the Epic Fury is a huge calculation.
Yep.
And I will articulate this again. It's not that I think that, and I don't want to end Epic Fury because I don't want the Iranian people to be free. I would end Epic Fury because I am curious, actually I'm cynical about its ability to achieve its stated results. Its stated objectives. In reference to the court packing, I disagree with you. So actually, Fetterman would probably be a better candidate for me. In reference to healthcare, like I said, I'm not as aggressive about U.S. healthcare, and I actually want a multi-payer model. If you look at the European models, oftentimes they're multi-payer with a public option. Then in reference to the culture war stuff, once again, I might be siding with Fetterman because while I can understand that the progressives feel like Hispanics have been under attack, the Constitution has been shredded in reference to ICE. Trans people have been under vicious attack for pretty much since for a decade. But the Trump administration 2.0 in particular has been super aggressive about being anti-gay, all that kind of stuff. And then so basically, I understand the progressive argument, but I'm still sympathetic to we need to cool down the temperature. So maybe some reconciliation is necessary. And then also in reference to border control, I'm preferring Fetterman over Hasan. But I want to give you one thing that Hutch actually forwarded in his argumentation that I additionally agree with. So Hasan has made it crystal clear in his content that he thinks that America is an evil empire, that our intercessions overseas have killed more people than would be killed by a multipolar world, that Russia and China, while imperfect, should be geopolitical counterbalances to American imperialism and violence. And I also think that while you can cite checks on presidential power as reasons why this wouldn't happen, and realistically fear of assassination would probably be another check against Hasan Piker, the truth is that there's no structural prohibition against President Hasan Piker just taking our industrial secrets, our military industrial secrets, our military technology, our stealth technology, our ballistic missile technology, our laser systems, et cetera, and then effectively handing it to our rivals in order to birth a multipolar world. So for me, birthing that multipolar world where Russia and China.
That's what the Iran war has done. That's what I'm sorry to say that, but that's what the Iran war has done. If you look at people again, I think Robert Pape
I don't think so, but please expand.
Yes, American hegemony. The biggest threat to American geostrategic interest is this Iran war. How? We have empowered Iran. We have empowered China. We have empowered Russia by giving them control and access to the Strait of Hormuz and relatively making America weaker. America is being isolated from its allies. Countries like Canada, Australia, these countries are now needing to secure alliances and trade because of the tariffs. Additionally, by the way, which a Fetterman type is in support of. Maybe Hasan would also be in support of tariffs, but I happen to think that Hasan would probably be more targeted. But just taking Epic Fury, that action has made it crystal clear to observers that America can't be trusted. America is a nation that is willing to do incredibly stupid things, and it might be actually willing to drop out of NATO with respect to what's going on because the NATO didn't come to our rescue or whatever. And despite all of this, Fetterman supports the war. And this has done so much to empower our geostrategic rivals like Russia and China. It's not even debatable that the best off parties as a result of this war are Russia and China. And so you might say, oh, well, Hasan ideologically thinks America bad, America bad, America bad. Maybe you could say that and that he would turn over our country to China. For me, that's not a huge risk of him doing that for the same reasons. I don't think it's a big risk of Marxist-Leninism taking hold in this country. But if you want to talk about the geostrategic interests of America, this war is crystallizing. Like, if you don't give a shit about America's geostrategic position, if you support the war.
Yeah, well, sorry. I was actually muted on my end. Let me unmute myself. So, I'm going to read. I got a oil super chat, so I want to read it that way. Even if it's rude, we could, deal with it. Kingslayer Damocles for 5 says, Pisco asked, would the courts go without a fight? But also said Hasan would pack the court. A Hasan packed court would go without a fight. Do you just want to answer that? I think I could answer it, but why don't you just answer it? I think he's saying that like the institutions would check Hasan, but if Hasan packs the court, how do they check Hasan?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I can see why someone might think that there's a contradiction. But in general, I think that the nominees, that there's going to be limits to what a Hasan type president is going to be able to do vis-a-vis the courts. I don't think he's going to be able to do everything he wants and to pack all lower federal courts or indeed the Supreme Court with Mike from PAs. Okay, I really don't think that he will have the ability to do that. Just by the way, I think that if Trump nominates like Rudy Giuliani, I don't think he's going to get through the Judiciary Committee in this context. And so I'm not saying that Hasan has less power vis-a-vis Trump in this context. I think there are limits to who Trump could reasonably nominate. And the American lawyers, the legal community, just like the military community in general, is a conservative community. Now, I understand that a lot of lawyers come from liberal institutions, but when I'm talking about conservative here, I mean preserving of culture. There's not a lot of Marxist attorneys that come out of law school. Law school very quickly, like, America pills you, and in general instills in you, notwithstanding like kind of like socially liberal predilections if you go to some of the top schools, but it makes you an institutionalist by heart. And so for similar reasons, I think that the packing efforts that I do support would be caged in, and it wouldn't just be putting in Marxist judges. And I don't think it would be an unlimited set of judges. I think it would be some discrete amount, and that we would still have conservative justices on the Supreme Court. That's my answer.
No, I think that's a fair answer. Then I don't know if this one necessarily needs an answer, but it is a large donation. So Grassroots, thank you for the oil today, $50. He is a Pittsburgher, met Fetterman multiplicatively as a mayor, voted for him once. He does represent his constituency more lefterly as a mayor, but Pennsylvania is heterodox in nature. This is him actually representing his constituency now as a senator. And so I think his statement is just like,
he represents
it's a purple
people.
State.
I mean, yeah, I don't really understand why this is relevant to the consideration for president, the fact that he comes from a purple state. And to me, it doesn't justify the actions taken by Fetterman, because there are senators who are much more in danger who haven't done that. Think of like Georgia, Ossoff. Again, Ossoff, I keep going back to Ossoff, Warnock, these kinds of people. They have taken some centristy votes, and it annoys me. Mark Kelly has too. It annoys me at times, but they're in more vulnerable districts than or more vulnerable states than Fetterman is in. And look at Fetterman's approval overall among his core Democratic base. It has plummeted. So I don't think you can say that the people who actually voted for Fetterman were well represented, given that his entire base has completely flipped. And now he's overall supported by Republicans in the state of Pennsylvania. That should tell you something, by the way. The fact that Fetterman's negatives, it was like a minus 100 swing among Democrats. Guys, I have never seen any swing on anything that is minus 100. And you're here telling me that I'm crazy as a Democrat for saying Fetterman bad, he's almost MAGA. It's just how most Pennsylvania Democrats think of Fetterman at this point. Again, I want to stress, minus 100 swing. And I want to address one other thing in the chat. Talking about Trump, Hutch says the guardrails hold. Pisco disagrees. I don't disagree. I think that the guardrails in general, our system has held, and I think it will hold. There are some guardrails that definitely have not held. That's just unobjectionable. The question isn't have all the guardrails held. It's which guardrails have held, how much have they held. But overall, our structure has held. I've never taken the position that it hasn't or it won't overall. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I love that my chat wants to engage with Pisco.
Sure,
but
yeah.
I want to engage with Pisco. So I'm going to read these two briefly because I do think they're funny. But then I want to get into the degradation of the American geopolitical position, and I want to push back with information that I've consumed. So, Larry Hutchinson for the 10, thank you, King. To push back, I think and by the way, Pisco chatters, like his stream.
Oh, thank you.
Share his stream
Appreciate
with his friends.
Yeah.
And engage with chat. That way it's algorithmically boosted. Super chats and memberships, if you got them. Creating content, while it is the best job on the planet, in my opinion, we do have to pay our bills. So please, if you like Pisco or think he's an interesting voice in the political scene, guys, give him money. So Larry Hutchinson says, to push back, I think people's argument is that Hasan would be able to pack his cabinet in government positions similar to how Trump has.
Yeah, agreed.
And that will further weaken our society. But I think you already addressed that, basically saying, like, you think the guardrails will hold. And then Barabas Dantiak, this is the one that I truly wanted to address, which is Hasan appoints Anissa Joma as his treasury secretary. And he says, the money is now gone. I'm going to say the money is now gone because she spent it on exotic animals.
Well, I want to respond. I think what people are asking me to do is like to do the ritual of Hasan bad and all the bad stuff. So I want to go through that theoretic exercise with you guys. I do think that it's quite possible that you would see unhinged people in positions of authority. I do think that America would cut off like relations with Israel. And geostrategically, who knows if that makes sense. Although I do think that America needs to stop all aid to Israel. And I am really, really critical of how Israel, in addition to Trump, has gotten us into this war. So I actually am in favor of being more hawkish on Israel, just to be clear. But he might do stupid stuff like that, like overall cutting off all diplomatic relationships. I'm not sure that is the smart play in the area, even though morally and ethically, maybe you might have some reason to do it. He might do things like failed collectivization strategies, attempts to and maybe he would even pass legislation. I think they'll make a meal of it in the courts. I think that if he tries to do like overall collectivization more generally than in specific areas like healthcare or whatever, I think that there'll be huge failures. I think that if he tries to have an insane budget, although really Republicans cannot argue on the budget stuff, right? Republicans passed a big, beautiful bill. So I don't want to hear about deficit spending. I think he would cut massively the military if he could. And I'm not in favor of the kinds of cuts that a lot of leftists want to see in the military. In general, I think that it should be efficient. We shouldn't be wasting money. And oftentimes there's capture of the military and there's agency capture, and we spend way more than we need to. But in general, I'm not in favor of like massively lowering the military budget. I think the military needs to be well funded in America. I believe that America should project strength, and I think that military is actually also important for innovation. And so that's a heterodox position that among leftists and among even liberals who are like, usually we need to cut the military by 50%. I do not go there. I think that would be really bad. And I think that a lot of his efforts to try to do like wealth tax and that kind of stuff will meet with like huge resistance, social problems. Right wingers will try to undermine him. It'll lead to strife and shit. So if he tried to do that stuff, so I'm not saying that it'll be all happy sunshine. He wouldn't be my first choice. We're dealing with a hypothetical of him versus Fetterman. That's why it's a tougher hypothetical than like Obama versus Hasan.
And I'm going to say, guys, I appreciate your passion. Larry Hutchinson, I'll try to incorporate what you just said into my thing, but I want to engage with Pisco. If you want to engage with Pisco, then DM him on Discord and, say, hey, man, I want to debate you about this topic. Sure. I want to talk to this motherfucker. Okay, so anyways, I've been consuming different sources in reference to the geopolitical analysis of the Iranian conflict. Not that it's not bad. To be clear, it is bad. However, I think there's some details here. I was referencing more giving away our technological gap, which I don't necessarily is affected by what you said. But I do want to get into the geopolitics as well. And Larry Hutchinson, as a part of this, is saying, I think that Hasan Piker would not back Taiwan, South Korea, Ukraine, etc. And that could be a huge problem. That's something that Ukraine issue.
I totally concur with the Ukraine stuff and the Taiwan stuff. I think that's bad. And it would be, unfortunately, something that I would be willing to stomach in favor of the other policy benefits, but I do think it's bad. Trump has also stopped like a lot of aid to Ukraine. But I want to support Ukraine. I think that it's a good investment and also the right thing to do for Ukraine. Similar story on Taiwan, and so unfortunately, that would be really bad. But again, sorry, I'm so sorry to do this, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. And you've been so polite.
Yeah, go ahead.
Trump in this war, right, has already made our capacity in Asia way, way, way worse, both from a geostrategic perspective, but also the interceptor perspective, where he's moving assets where they're needed, right, in this pivot to Asia to the Iran conflict. And so, yes, I don't agree ideologically with Hasan on probably Taiwan or on Ukraine, but the effect of the war, again, it overdetermines and mitigates some of that risk, in my view.
Yes, I agree that logistically we have degraded significant amounts of our capacity in Indo-PACOM, Indian and Pacific Command, supporting the Iranian conflict, and therefore Taiwan is arguably the most vulnerable it's ever been from. If China wanted to make a move, they might be scared to make a move because it seems like we're just running around punching people in the fucking face. But from a logistics standpoint, we actually probably wouldn't have the capacity to contest them if they try to take Taiwan. But what I want to point out in reference to geopolitical analysis is, as an example, I hear what you're saying in reference to this has made Russian oil and natural gas go up, which has buoyed their financial reserves, which has made them financially a bit stronger in reference to the Russian position.
Yeah, and we've desanctioned Russia too. We've desanctioned them 100%. Yeah.
Which, fuck. Yeah. Not just that. Oh, we desanctioned them in order to sell their oil because the Strait of Hormuz price is so
understand
bad. We're allowing it.
Yesterday we talked to
Europeans. Europeans aren't as pissed at us.
Yesterday we talked to Dylan Burns, and Dylan Burns this is a disaster for Ukraine. This war. And he's right. Every objective, international relations person says this is helping Russia. America desanctioned Iran initially, right? And then they desanctioned Russia. And so Russia obviously is, and they're making a shit ton of money as an energy exporter. And so this has empowered Russia. This is a boon to Russia. And for China, it's people might think, oh, well, they are importing a lot of oil, and so they're worse off. No, relatively speaking, they're better off. They're better off because America's relatively worse off. But also they're commanding more respect as a kind of stable force from the perspective of correct, yes, and they're able to maintain these relationships, and people are going to need to start relying on China more, and that's what is happening with even Western countries, even like Europe and certainly Canada, etc. They're all talking about pivoting to China and accepting them more. And so this war is really, really horrible on those ends. And I think that, again, it just mitigates the risk comparatively with Hasan.
Let me give you some. These are either silver linings or these are cope, and you can dismiss them if you want. So what has happened with and this could just be pure cope, but it's okay. What has happened with the Ukrainian military development? I know this is separate from the geopolitical analysis, but I just want to bring it up. Is that Ukraine has been, through necessity of the fickle nature of the Trump administration, seesawing back and forth on whether or not we're going to give them military or financial aid, has been quite creative in both developing internal weapons manufacturing, drone manufacturing, et cetera, and also securing secondhand American technology from Western European allies, including artillery pieces and artillery ammunition. Now, it might not be war changing, but even just watching a recent analysis of Ukrainian combined arms warfare, it seems like the Russians, I'm not kidding you, this is a tactical level engagement, but Russians engaged in tactics that effectively were feeding their weapons and their transports and their troops into a meat grinder, resulting in 100% casualties. And then Ukrainians were effectively able to counterattack with a combined arms warfare approach of drone observers, FPV drones, armored support in the front of a convoy, troop carriers immediately behind, sufficient disbursement that if any of them got taken out, they would be able to continue on with the mission. And then those combined arms combined with light infantry that was ready to take the fight with the Russians. And as a result, I know there's like a lot of bad news in Ukraine, but they were able to effectively absorb an attack, kill every Russian, and then counterattack successfully and take back a town. Now, I know that's like micro, but if you expand these tactics out across the Ukrainian armed forces, there's actually some good news here, or at least some really interesting technological and tactical developments.
I think if you would have told Ukrainians, or the whole world, maybe not Ukrainians, but certainly the whole world, the rest of the world, mainstream establishment, whatever you want to say, consensus, it would not have been prior to when this illegal invasion was launched by Russia that Ukraine would have held out this long. And I think that it's to our great shame that we haven't continued to fund it under Trump. And that's one of the reasons why I supported Kamala Harris. That's one of the reasons why we're mad that Hasan Piker wasn't as vocally, or Mamdani, or many of these other types weren't vocal about who they would endorse in 2024. And so Ukraine is a consideration, but and I think Fetterman is probably more pro-Ukraine than Hasan Piker. I think that Fetterman would support Ukraine, and that's good. That's all wonderful. And for that reason, you might think, therefore, Fetterman's better on Ukraine. But Fetterman supports the war. And so that's why I'm saying it's not as clear cut such that I would vote for Fetterman for all the other reasons, even though I think he is more pro-Ukraine. The other aspect here, which I think is very, 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 very important, and it's a good comment for Pizza Philosophy, is the people around him, right? I trust the people who are around Hasan Piker from the politician perspective, the people who he tries to associate with and tries to almost take ownership of, way more than whoever dirtbags are around Fetterman, who he doesn't even listen to half the time. And certainly, if we were to do a comparison to Marco Rubio, I trust the Mamdani, the Majority Report people, Bernie Sanders, AOC, Ossoff, any of the people that he's having on his campaign, whatever, way, 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 comparatively, way, way, way more than Fetterman staffers who are quitting, or if we're going to do the comparison to Republicans, any of these Republican advisors, etc.
Yeah, MAGA dipshits. Yeah, I get it. The just to blast through it though, I suppose. I think that likewise, the argument would be that Fetterman would be more supportive of Taiwan and South Korea. I think
that's true.
I'll forward a counter argument on your behalf though, that we have been arming Taiwan and South Korea for so long against a potential North Korean invasion and a Chinese invasion that effectively they already have the culture and weapons that might be necessary to repulse these attacks. And then not just that, they obviously have the motivation to do so. And then not just that, but it's unclear whether or not Trump would back Taiwan and South Korea. And so while Fetterman might be better on these things, Trump and the MAG movement certainly aren't. Now, what I want to say about the geopolitics, though, because I do think there's a silver lining in reference to Operation Epic Fury as well. If Iran had unilaterally attacked Israel and exclusively United States bases, I think Iran would be in an infinitely better geopolitical position diplomatically. But they were stupid, in my opinion, and they attacked 14 separate nations, striking like random civilian targets. They even hit like Azerbaijan. And it's like, what the fuck did Azerbaijan do to you? You know, like what the fuck is that? So for me,
yeah, some of that was stupid, but some of it was part of their escalation strategy, which is to make these the Gulf country. I think they probably went too broad in terms of their attacks, but they were trying to have a disproportional response. I don't know if you ever watched the West Wing, but it's like there's a scene where the president's like, what is the virtue of a proportionate response? But one of the reasons that Iran reacted disproportionately was to reestablish deterrence, which they did.
Right. Let me pick that apart in a second, but Grant Fandango says, you think Taiwan and South Korea could take on China alone? Really? No. I'm saying that from a defensive posture that could make China bleed sufficiently that China wouldn't be interested, and possibly even like the same way that Ukraine arguably was supposed to be captured within 3 or 4 days, the Chinese might find taking South Korea and taking Taiwan a lot more bloody and long than they expected to. That's what I'm trying to say. But anyways, the geopolitical silver lining out of attacking 14 countries. So I understand that the Gulf states and people in the Democratic Party and people in Canada and people in Europe are probably hugely angry with the Trump administration for kicking off Operation Epic Fury. And they might be saying, hey, we need to look to other strategic alliances.
Hey, can we just pause there? Because it's fucking hilarious. These corrupt oil kingdoms who are bribing American officials, who are bribing Trump, who are doing all these deals, they got fucked with. And you know what? I laugh because these motherfuckers thought they were going to have it easy by supporting Trump and doing these corrupt deals. And guess what? Fuck you guys. Fuck you guys for what you did to our country. And that's what happened. And you know what? It's horrible for the region. But sometimes, these people need a slap in the face. And I actually resent the influence both of Israel and the Gulf states in the United States of America, similar to how I resent all these Russian talking points coming into America and them choosing their preferred anointed candidate of Trump. And so, I mean, that's just, it's not really topical, but, I'm not pouring, I don't have a ton of sympathy for these people.
It's karmically very rich. The Schadenfreude that I'm sure you've shared in the Schadenfreude as well. The Schadenfreude that I've enjoyed over Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Tim Pool, and there was one other person. But effectively, like, I don't think Trump called out Tim Pool, but effectively he was like, oh, all these people are fucking low IQ dipshits. They were never MAGA. They were always grifters. They can eat a fucking dick. And now, like, the audience, Alex Jones. Now the audiences in Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson, and Candace Owens, they're split between like the people who are loyal to the creator and the people who are loyal to Trump, and they're fighting over who's the traitor.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
That has been an absolute fucking joy for me to enjoy
witness
over the past week.
No, I respect it, especially among like
a similar level of Schadenfreude of Gulf states bribing Trump and then getting fucked geopolitically.
Yeah, for you as an ever Trump Republican type, I can totally understand the amount of joy you must be seeing to watch like Trump betray Tucker and shit.
I'm like tearing up a little bit with like joy over these people who have dedicated. Oh, Megyn Kelly as well.
Megyn Kelly.
Dedicated so much of their time and energy to bending over backwards, breaking every principle that they've ever had in order to sim for the Trump administration, getting fucking cannibalized.
Did you see Tucker
by their own audience? Dude, I'm crying. I'm crying tears of joy right now. When There are literally chunks of water leaking out of my eyeballs over the amount of emotional catharsis that I'm experiencing over the past week.
You're beefing. You have tears of soy. No, I remember watching Tucker when he had his big like falling out with Trump stream where he's like, "How dare you say this, Trump?" He's like, "How dare you insult Islam? How dare you insult Allah? We don't do that as Christians. Insult." Like, dude, what? First of all, dude, this motherfucker's getting paid. Yes. These people. Fuck. Allegedly. I know it's a rumor. I'm not saying it as a statement of fact. It's just my opinion that it seems kind of odd. You're like, oh, we cannot insult Allah. We cannot insult these wonderful nations and whatever. But yeah,
I'm wrong. You can release all his financial statements, but like,
I have no sympathies. I have no sympathies for the Gulf states. Very few, if any. I have very little sympathies for Israel because I think also, by the way, if you're pro-Israel, I think this war is a disaster for Israel. I don't think that. I mean, Netanyahu,
internationally, absolutely,
100%.
I think regionally, because they do have tactical nuclear weapons. I think that the Iranian regime was one of the biggest powers that they beefed with, and they have been decapitated. I do not accept the arguments that Iran is stronger than when the war started.
Well, it depends what you mean by stronger. It depends what you mean by stronger. Right?
Well,
if you mean by stronger, if what you mean by stronger is in the convention. No, that's not what I'm talking about.
Maybe.
No. This is why Iran is
logistically absolutely the fuck no.
Then we're just not talking about the same thing. I would agree with you in terms of like military conventional capacity. They're weaker. Of course they're weaker. We've been bombing their targets, right? Like that on that, obviously, logistically, of course. In terms of lives lost and operational, they've suffered tremendously. But that's not the terms of why I say that Iran is stronger. Iran is stronger in the two key ways. Why are they stronger in the two key ways? The first key way is internal consolidation of power. Why? Because the great Satan, right, is attacking Iran, and we've undercut the pro-democracy movement and the discontent, right? The Iranian people, this is Robert Pape that I'm stealing from, they're not going to forget that Trump said we're going to destroy a civilization. How would you support America? The Shah's, whatever, crown prince. How are you going to do that in this context? You can't. That's number one. Consolidation of power domestically. They've made the regime more intractable and stronger internally. And the second is Iran has now tested and has able to take control and project power over more economy, the world economy. That is the Strait of Hormuz. That was all theoretical before. Now they actually are able to control the Strait of Hormuz 100%. And so
I have a bet with a MAGA guy. So what he said is that I'm just gonna give you this schizophrenic. I'm got totally attention deficit disorder side point, but I want to inject you with the MAGA cope that Teriak, a guy I debated, injected me with. I'm still recovering from the amount of psychic damage. Okay, so what he said is, in Operation Paperclip, where we brought all the Nazis over after World War II, what actually happened was they infiltrated the CIA and they infiltrated the highest levels of government. We've been controlled by neo-Nazis for the past 80 years. Donald Trump is the anti-deep state messiah.
Oh my God.
Who is actually, through his military operations in Iran and his dismissal of random generals, is actually purging the deep state of these neo-Nazis. And what's going to happen in the next 30 days, this is a combination. Maybe Teriak didn't say this, but somebody else said it in chat and it was very funny. The Shah's son, whatever Pahlavi, he is on the verge of leading a glorious democratic revolution within Iran that's going to overthrow the Ayatollahs momentarily, literally days or weeks, like anytime within the next month, this is going to happen. And so pro-democratic forces are going to overthrow the Ayatollahs. We're going to have a Western-friendly, pseudo-democratic monarchy in Iran. They're going to reopen the Strait of the Hormuz, and Trump is going to be vindicated. And all of the panicans and all of the never-Trumpers and all of the liberals and all the progressives who hate Trump, they're all going to have to eat shit in the next 30 days when a liberated Iran reopens the Strait of Hormuz. You have to trust the plan.
Yeah. So the plan trusters, they're just on another planet. And unfortunately, we're going to have to leave them in the dust because there are still people who say that, I think, what was their first theory about Mueller? Well, no, him, but also like there were the previous predictions were about like Robert Mueller and Durham, and they're actually all about to arrest mass people, and that's what January 6th was. It was like an arrest. So we have to leave them behind, unfortunately, and deal with people who share our epistemic foundations. But yeah, no, it's a complete cope at this point, and even Trump knows.
When I'm telling you that, like, him laying out this like schizophrenic plan trusting scenario, like, it would have caused me less brain damage if he had come to my house and just punched me in the fucking face repeatedly.
That's what it feels like watching Ben Shapiro, by the way.
Bewildered.
That's what it feels like watching Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro, the quote unquote sane conservative that a lot of people would love to go back to. Shapiro's over here being like, anyone who's saying that Iran is stronger, they're anti-American and they're lying to you. We have done such. So Shapiro and Levin and these people, the war is not going the way they want. And you can tell by how fucking mad they get that they know that, and they're deliberately lying or gaslighting themselves to say that it's going well. We are fucked right now, and there's not a good exit strategy. In my view, the best thing America can do is come to a horrible deal with Iran that gives them some amount of enrichment and that acknowledges at least some level of control over the strait. Maybe they'll open the strait, but only in return for us lifting all of our sanctions, and we'll always know that they can exert power over the strait, right? And that won't change. That won't change after this war. They're not just going to give that up, right? There's no way in which they give up effective control over the Strait of Hormuz, because we just know they have it in their card now. And that's why they're stronger. They're stronger because they're going to be able to negotiate a better deal. And even Trump, right? When Trump announced and then said and backed away from it, that we had a basic agreement on the 10-point framework with Iran, that is like a maximalist's Iran ask that we wouldn't be talking about this.
Dude, the subpoints on the Iranian 10-point plan, they said that because they knew the base was not going to Google the 10-point plan. But if you Google the 10-point plan, 7 of them, like 7.5 of them, were effectively like geopolitical non-starters.
Yeah.
It was like, let us do our civilians, let us do enrichment the way that we want to, withdraw all your forces
bases
from the region, give us like,
reparations
rights over the northern half of the Strait of Hormuz. The 7.5 of them were non-starters. They so clearly wanted to get to the table that they were they were just hoping nobody would Google the 10-point plan.
Right. And so now they're stuck in so I've laid out what I think are the 4 options. I don't think they're mutually exclusive or that they're exhaustive, but this is basically where Trump is stuck. Trump can either escalate, and that would involve troops on the island, right? Or troops on the ground in mainland Iran.
Card and southern Iran, yeah.
Right. So that's an option, and that would be a terrible option. That would be a terrible option because number one,
the legacy. Sorry for interrupting, but the legacy on the Trump administration would be that it's already super fucking bad, but that he is the biggest hypocritical fucking sellout in American history, because he effectively goes from being one of the most ardent critics of the war on terror to a perpetuator of an unpopular unilateral war on terror style operation similar to Afghanistan and Iraq, without the consent of Congress.
I agree. No, I agree. I agree
that mind blowing that it's like, it's almost shocking. It's almost shocking.
I agree that would be the narrative, although I disagree with the assumption that he was always against the Iraq war and that he was always anti-hawkish and that kind of stuff. But I do agree that would be one of the narratives that's being played. And in fairness to people who would say that narrative, that is a style that Trump and at certain moments would adhere to, no new wars, etc., whatever, and the anti-neocon and the Jeb Bush statement. So yeah, he can escalate. That's option 1. He won't, that's an impossible I think he actually will, sorry. But it's like an impossibly horrible choice. 2, he can unilaterally disengage or effectively unilaterally disengage by either having a deal that's so beneficial to Iran, it's the equivalent of disengagement, or just leave the region. That would have the effect of a major loss in America, and he basically made a mess and said, oh, it's up to Europe to clean it up, and it would give Iran everything it needs, and it would give just cede over that power. Then number 3, it would be to come to a horrible deal, and that deal probably would involve lifting all the sanctions, accepting that Iran is going to have some amount of enrichment, and basically leaving Trump way worse off in terms of a deal-making perspective than pre-war. And then finally, it's some version of nuclear blackmail or the use of a nuclear weapon, which would be disastrous for a lot of other reasons. And so those are like, for my mind, like how you get some amount of resolution on the conflict. And every single one of those options is really, really horrific. And I don't know exactly what he'll choose. My guess is he'll escalate or unilaterally disengage, but those are horrible options. And anyone who supports that, like Fetterman, is a fucking idiot. Putting aside the fact that, like, okay, I'm against the regime too, bro. But if you're in favor of America being made weaker by forcing us to pick among those choices, fuck you. You're stupid.
I think what's wild, what's truly fucking wild, and I know this is like a horrific suggestion, but I seriously think that taking what would cause the least amount of blood, well, maybe not bloodshed, but the least amount of like geopolitical harm to the United States and its allies, I swear to God, would be an amphibious assault on the southern half of Iran, a arming of the pro-democratic revolutionary militias and Kurds.
It's not going to work,
with American special forces and air power, taking Tehran, then seizing Karg Island. And by the way, I know this is horrific. I know everything I'm saying. You're like, Connor, this is a horror show. What the fuck are you talking about?
It would be tens of thousands of American lives.
I'm hearing the words coming out of my mouth, and I know I am suggesting to you a horror film. And then taking Karg Island, and then effectively deposing the Iranian regime, killing the second Ayatollah Khomeini, whatever, Jr., and then effectively, because we've already done Iraq for 2 decades, billions of dollars, tens of thousands of lives. And we've already done Afghanistan, which was thousands of lives, billions of dollars. Arguably, I think the entire thing was $2 or $3 trillion, the global war on terror. So
but this is what Israel wanted, right? So the reason you're talking like this,
but then I would say, literally, just to finish the idea, literally, the second they were deposed, withdraw, and whatever happens, happens. Which again, I know is horrific, because then you have the pro-democratic forces and the remnants of the regime engaged in a decades-long civil war over a third of the world's energy supply. I get it. But hopefully they're so busy fighting each other that they leave the Strait alone. And then also we kind of tell them like, hey, you guys can fight each other over the future of your country, but if you come into the Strait, we're going to fucking like tactical.
We've literally learned nothing. We learned nothing. We've learned nothing. Oh, this is great. I hear
me when I say this. I know I just lost any goodwill I had with your chat who thought I was hot earlier in the morning. Okay. Hear me when I say this. I know what I just suggested is a horror film resulting in between 5,000 and 20,000 American dead,
I think
billions of dollars have spent, and hundreds of thousands of Iranian dead. I know I just said that. Yeah. Sorry, your response.
Yeah, no, my response to that is, number one, I can understand the thinking for the following reason. Israel wanted to put us in this position because that's how they operate, by creating fait accomplis, right? That's why they're putting in the settlements in, among other reasons, ideological, right? In the West Bank, and be like, oh, well, what are you going to do? Move us all? They try to create the condition on the ground that once they're there, it's like, oh, well, we're already here, might as well, right? And that's why they're bombing all like the negotiators. Whenever, like, Trump was like feeling optimistic about having like a deal at one point, I think, and they just like killed a negotiator that they're working with. I forget his actual name. If someone says it, they'll remind me of it. And so Israel is actively trying to scuttle negotiations. They did so in the 12-day war. And so one of the reasons that you're thinking that way is because Israel is trying to create the conditions for a fait accompli, like they do with the settlements, like they do with annexation, and like they're doing with Iran again. The reason why I think it doesn't work is, number one, it relies a lot on sunk cost, because I think that once you start to see Americans die initially, there will be a push from the families and supporters of the alleged president that, like, well, what is it all for? They shan't have died for nothing. We have to go in all the way. So I think that there's a lot of that kind of thinking of like, well, we can't let them have the Strait of Hormuz. That's a sunk cost. Them having control over that already happened. Like, we can't go back to square one. And I'm sure if you try to give a time machine to Trump and them, they would go back to February 27th. But you just can't go back to Kansas, Toto. It's a sunk cost if we lose troops on Karg Island. to escalate further. It's a sunk cost. Those 13 people, they're already dead. We're not bringing them back. And they already have control over the strait. The question is, what's the best afterwards? And I just don't think that a ground operation is likely for America to win that operation. Why? Because I don't take America. I'm sure if America was bloodlusted and America really wanted to, they could. I'm not doubting that America, if it really put in all its effort, could effectuate this outcome. Definitely, like, agree with you there. The problem is I take America as it is, not as I would like it to be. There is no political will or support for that kind of operation in this country. It wouldn't last, and it would take decades and decades over many administrations.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but no war on terror veterans are in, like I would say 70%, 80% of this are not in favor of any kind of Iranian regime change. The 20% of war on terror veterans who might be in support of it effectively want revenge for the IRGC training Shiite militias in Iraq. And they also have some kind of like bloodlust where they just like fucking killing people. So that's like 20% of war on terror veterans. I think the current military, after looking at the history of the war on terror, are not exactly saber rattling about it. I think the American people in general are not supporting of it. You would effectively need, and I shit you not, you would need like a new 9/11 or a dirty bomb going off in Manhattan to actually get the kind of bloodlust that was common during the war on terror age, the early years of the war on terror. You would need a new Iranian-backed attack on the American homeland.
And Iran doesn't want to do that because
tens of thousands of Americans. And number one, you're right. I think the chances of that happening are super low because it would be so disadvantageous to Iran.
Can I ask you a question, honestly?
Two,
I'm not saying who would do it. I'm asking who would have more of an incentive to launch a bomb in a major metropolitan area at this point in the war for their war aims? Would it be Israel or Iran?
Weirdly enough, yeah, I think you said Israel. I was going to say like maybe the Gulf states who hated Iran, but yeah, it would be clearly
Israel, someone who wants America to get more engaged. I mean, Iran is being pretty savvy on social media. Did you see what they said about the Pope? So Trump comes out and like condemns the Pope, says the Pope is weak on crime, says he's Jesus or whatever. And Iran comes out, the president's like, we condemn the insult to the Pope. Jesus was a prophet and, peace be upon him, whatever. And so they're aware of their audience. They're like winning the meme war. And I don't think they would do that. I don't think they're going to give the warmongers an easy excuse to get the American people where they need to go. And it's already insanely unpopular. And no one, even if it happened, they might not believe it.
That much credit because obviously there was plenty of like AI slop claiming military victories that had never happened, Yeah. So like I don't want to give
as
Iran
Ukraine did, Ghost of Kyiv, right? Like we all know that this kind of
love the Ghost of Kyiv. You don't love the Ghost of Kyiv?
Yeah, he's in our hearts, all right? He's in our hearts. No, I agree that like a lot of his propaganda.
The Ghost of Kyiv is here. But hold on. I know this is a tangent, but maybe I'm getting tired, so my ADD's kicking in. Listen, man, in the early stages of the Ukrainian invasion by Russia, there was this prediction that Kyiv and
would fall.
like Ukraine was going to fall instantaneously. Yes. And also, Russia is arguably one of the top 5 most powerful militaries on the planet. And so to have Ukrainian pilots who are effectively flying in Soviet-era fighter aircraft, having the fucking stones to even go up in the air, considering Russian anti-air
It was a heroic story. It was a very inspiring story.
Balls of fucking steel. So was there a single Ukrainian ace who shot down 40 fucking Russians within 48 hours of combat operations and his name was the Ghost of Kyiv? Probably not.
No.
But were there brave Ukrainian aerial warriors who fucking sacked up and got into the skies as their country was being invaded? Yes.
No, therefore, I'm not making fun of them.
Kyiv does not exist in a historical context. He's like a spiritual embodiment of
like Santa Claus
of Ukraine.
No, I agree.
Whereas an AI video of a fucking American aircraft carrier being blown up, that not only doesn't exist literally, that also does not exist spiritually.
I'm not trying to.
Iran's getting its shit pushed from a strategic and tactical level.
I'm not Mehdi Hasan, okay? I'm not trying to equate Ukraine and Iran here in terms of morality or anything else. Okay,
doing that. Because my distaste of Mehdi Hasan has consistently been justified, and that was one of them.
Listen, I really like Mehdi Hasan. Even though I disagree with him. I mean, I know that that's like an insane concept to a lot of people, not necessarily you, but even though I disagree with him on that, and I disagree with what I thought he was sweeping a little bit for Hasan on Twitter. I posted something about it, just to be clear. But I'm not comparing them in any other respect other than they understand now that the war is not just with respect to conventional capabilities and what's going on the battlefield, but it's also a game of hearts and minds. And so both internally, right? That's why I bring up the fact that Trump said these stupid things to insult Iran, and that's probably going to unify the country, but also externally, right? And so if you're worried about hearts and minds abroad, maybe you're going to be like more conciliatory like Zelensky is, right? Zelensky put on a suit when Trump said put on a suit. Zelensky is playing this kind of coy game with and Iran, I don't think is going to be stupid enough to give Trump a layup and an excuse to get the American people on his side. That's why I'm saying, like, I don't think you can expect in terms of your calculations to have that handed to you on a silver platter, because Iran well understands that the American people are against this war. They have people here, they have spies, and they can also just look on the internet to see what's the fuck's going on, even though they might cancel it for most of their people.
An extreme advantage and disadvantage of a free society is you can actually gauge the temperature of the population relatively easily. I think this is probably 80%, 90% unpopular, and the people who are they're either hawks who just love fucking war, or they're giga Zionists who can see the potential strategic benefit for the state of Israel. And you did mention this before, but I want to mention it as well. I hate to fuel conspiracy theories about American Jewish complicity in the geostrategic goals of Israel, but I don't think there's any other way to explain Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro's cheerleading of the Iran war, other than they're not looking at American geostrategic interests. They're looking at Israeli geostrategic
100%.
That's the only way to justify it.
1,000%. And that, unless you take the view that a conventional war with Iran is forthcoming and winnable, and in the long-term interest of America, that's like, but the thing is, do you really think they believe that is forthcoming and winnable? Maybe they do, but if they do, it's at tremendous cost, as you just laid out. So the best thing I think America can do is a negotiated settlement, and that negotiated settlement is going to be like poison. It's going to be like an insane pill to swallow, because and the reason why you can expect that, and the reason why Iranians are going to be able to drive a harder bargain, is because they're winning. That proves, in other words, it shows they're winning, because they're going to be able to extract those kinds of concessions, and they won't accept anything less than a sufficient threshold.
A quote that I want to give you and your audience, and if you had any specific things that you wanted to talk about, I'm more than happy to continue to dig in. I feel like we've had a greit conversation, but I do like to keep us around 2 hours just for the sake of consumability and avod. Clausewitz, I forget, Polish, German, something, I forget, but he's like a 19th century war philosopher, I think. Clausewitz has this quote, which is, I think you really need to conceptualize, which is, war is diplomacy by other means. So oftentimes people separate out war as a chess game, where the game of war is to eliminate as many of the enemy's pieces as possible. But you cannot explain the history of warfare and diplomacy unless you actually Prussian, so German. Okay, thank you. I knew I was wrong somewhere. But the excuse me. But the only way that you can explain the results of war, we obviously didn't nuke all of Japan. That would have been a chess-style complete military victory. What we did is we nuked 2 cities, forced them to the table, and then negotiated a diplomatic settlement. And so the same way with Iran, if you look at our goals from a diplomatic and military lens, we have to eliminate the Iranian regime, overthrow it democratically, and if failing that, we need to negotiate with the Iranian regime in order to denuclearize them, and in order to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And then that's pretty much what we have to do in order to achieve victory that doesn't result in years of bloodshed or even a decade of bloodshed. Whereas the Iranian regime, their sole diplomatic goal is survive.
Survive.
And so they're survive and make elimination of their survival as a regime so costly, either in blood or treasure, that the world leaves them the fuck alone. And so their goal is a lot closer, diplomatically, logistically, militarily. Survival is a lot easier than reopening the Strait of Hormuz, denuclearization, democratic overthrow of the Iranian regime. And so I think we're kind of fucked because our diplomatic goals are so ambitious while our logistical capacity to achieve those goals is so fraught.
And where we have an ally who's actively working against us, against our own interests, and in my opinion, their own interest. I mean, just look, and this is where I'll end, because to keep us to 2 hours, Israel has completely burned all of its capital in America, effectively all of its capital in America. And very quickly, they're going to start to understand what it's like to have a generation of Americans, including myself, by the way, who are totally against their continued influence on American foreign policy, as I am. In fact, I take the view that we should stop funding Israel completely and totally. And in fact, that we should haul in Israeli ambassadors and say, what the hell is going on? America won't support your continued efforts, given how bad you've acted. And that is going to be true of the future of the Republican Party, in my view. And it's already happened in the Democratic Party. It wasn't, I think Netanyahu, in other words, has fucked whatever goodwill Israel had left internationally. And in the long term, it won't be in their interest. And that makes me worried about how they might lash out. In fact, I'm almost more worried about Israel than I am about Iran.
I think that last sentence is a little extreme in my opinion. However, I think that it's going to be a generational thing where the millennials, the people who are old enough to have World War II grandparents, who effectively communicated the horror of the Holocaust, the importance of a Jewish state. I think they call it the post-war consensus or something like that. That mythos of a third of international Jews were wiped out. Therefore, not only do you need to be nice to Jews that you meet in everyday life, but also you need to be sympathetic to the nation state of Israel. I think that that's probably going to continue because obviously I have Jewish friends. There is apologia that I think makes sense for the nation state of Israel. But I do think it's kind of funny that, for instance, the seizure of southern Lebanon, how the fuck am I supposed to justify that? Seriously, even as a tepid Zionist, the nation state of Israel is it needs to exist to safeguard the Jewish people. But the Israelis, through Bibi Netanyahu, they are simultaneously saying we do not recognize the West Bank at all. Regardless of international or domestic pressure, we will not recognize a Palestinian state. Those territories are Judea and Samaria, and we will absorb them over the ensuing decades. Gaza, we will absorb over ensuing decades, and we will either ethnically cleanse and or hold as second-class citizens and or not even grant citizenship to the Palestinians that live in this territory. And then not just that, but we are going to actively expel 600,000 people from southern Lebanon because they're the wrong religion, and since they have the wrong religion, they might be sympathetic to our enemies.
Yeah, I mean,
there's no civic nationalist, liberal democratic justification for those actions. It is.
There's potentially
ideologically. Sorry, I'll finish the sentence and I'll shut up. It is truly ideologically impossible for me to argue that these are neutral or good things. It is impossible.
I definitely hear you on that. And I think that there's a perhaps biblical justification that some Christian Zionists use to justify it, including the current ambassador to Israel when asked about the religious claims. Huckabee? This is Mike Huckabee. He was quite sympathetic to
I heard that one. That one hurt me psychically.
Right, the maximalist biblical claims, although, query whether or not what exactly is that religious mandate and how much land does it sort of extend to. This is why I find the kind of right to exist argument to be an equivocation fest. If you're speaking specifically about international law, there is no such right. If you're speaking normatively about whether they should exist, I think that depends on whether or not Israel continues to choose to annex, invade, and attack its neighbors. I have for years been in favor of a two-state solution, but if Israel insists on making it a fait accompli and just taking and stealing other people's land, I don't know that how can Israel justifiably exist as a Jewish state in that context. I think it's incompatible with the goals of free-thinking people all over the world. So I think that they have forever tarnished their image in the eye of the American electorate. And I want to make clear about this, the American Jew. I think that by and large, there is, if you were to poll people, Jewish Americans who voted by and large for Kamala, there's a growing disgust even among American Jews. And so I don't think it's coextensive. I think in many ways, the anti-Semitism conflation with anti-Zionism, which Ezra talks about in his article about Hasan, that it goes both ways. It goes both ways from the truly anti-Semitic people in America who are pushing that conflation.
Yeah, if you absolutely Israel at all.
Yes, and the ADL and any of these entities who continue to try to interfere and drive us towards this horribly illegal, horrible for America war, as well as other policies. So it's a disaster. It's a disaster for America. It's a disaster for Israel itself. And Fetterman has no moral ground to claim here over his party, which has seen, I think, the truth.
Yeah, as a tepid Zionist, can the Zionists just like throw me a fucking bone? Can they be like, "Whoops, just kidding. The annexation of southern Lebanon was a bad move. We're actually gonna, go back to the previous borders." Can you say, "Oh, Gaza was fucked up and that's our bad, so we're actually gonna do a sincere redevelopment project in order to establish like a decent home for the Palestinians who got fucked up in the Gazan conflict"? Can you say like, okay, yeah, historically we believe that this is Judea and Samaria and eventually Jews should occupy it, but we're going to treat West Bank or Palestinian Muslims with dignity and care and love? Because when you annex southern Lebanon, when you blow the fuck out of Gaza, don't make sincere efforts in order to rebuild Gaza, when you annex the West Bank through progressive like settler movements that effectively they're allowed to seize territory, build territory, then if anybody attacks them whatsoever, they're effectively allowed to not only kill whoever their attackers are, but then bulldoze the houses.
Yeah, how would you react, Connor?
Person's family.
Connor,
it gets a little hard to defend. I'm not going to lie. It gets a little hard to defend.
But Connor, to be honest, how would you react if in your house, let's say that you lived in a border state, a bunch of scary looking Central Americans and gun wielding Mexicans came over and just like started bulldozing your town? What would you do?
Yeah, I think the reaction would be violence.
I think you would take the law into your own hands. I'm not here to justify terrorism or whatever, but this kind of this is why
I was going to put in the caveat. I don't think I would shoot unarmed women and kids in the face.
I'm not. No,
but military-aged males who are armed, who are acting as an extension.
The point is, it's foreseeable. It's foreseeable that there's going to be a violent reaction to it, to that kind of conduct. And it's foreseeable that Israel starting or helping to start wars abroad is going to lead to further conflict. And so this kind of violence is not like, it's all well and good to say, oh, well, you shouldn't attack. Yes, I agree. You shouldn't. You shouldn't be a terrorist. You shouldn't do all that shit. But if it's eminently foreseeable, and if people behave predictably to this kind of conduct, then that should be something that should be considered by the Israeli government. I don't think that the people who are in charge of Israel right now have their country's interests at heart. And certainly, I think it's all a house of cards that is in the process of collapsing.
I'll put this as my last thing for the wrap for hopefully injecting us with a little bit of hopium. Viktor Orban, despite getting backed by Donald Trump, lost his election to a center-right party that is allegedly more sane. It looks like we're hopefully going to have a blue wave in 26. We might not, have the anti-MAGA coalition, to be clear, the anti-Trump coalition. It might not win the Senate, but at least we'll be able to largely make Donald Trump a lame duck, hopefully, for the last 2 years, and maybe introduce articles of impeachment, even if they fail. I think it's probably important to introduce the articles of impeachment. And then I'm hoping that in 28, we can have a anti-MAGA, anti-Trump cult referendum in this country where we effectively say, hey, you didn't think it was going to be that bad? It actually turned out to be exactly as fucking bad. Like, the liberal wine moms were right. I hate to say it. The liberal wine moms in 2015 were totally fucking correct. This dude was a piece of shit. He shouldn't have been trusted with power. Anything good that happened in Trump 1 was probably a fluke and in spite of Trump, not because of Trump. And then COVID was mismanaged. And then the fact that we elected him again is kind of fucking crazy, but Americans can't learn a lesson unless they learn it the hard way. So hopefully we learned it the fucking hard way, and we can preserve the republic.
I hope you're right. You mentioned North. I talked to that guy, and he, and I think you do, still have this aspiration to change your party. I don't think that that's a viable thing that will happen in the short to medium term. Maybe in the long term, they'll get off Trump or whatever, but there's no signs of it yet. I mean, I do believe the polls have showed that he has overwhelming Republican support. Now, maybe the denominator of MAGA is shrinking. I certainly hope that. But I'm not convinced that there is, a plan to have an anti-MAGA candidate. I mean, who would that even be? I mean, where is the room for that in the Republican Party? To the extent that there's a lane, it's maybe like the Tucker lane. But Tucker is not in principle anti-MAGA. He's in principle anti-Iran policy, and he's a form of MAGA-ism. He was totally fine to stand by in the intervention in Venezuela. He's totally fine to stand by the attempted theft of the election. And so they're all post-truth assholes. And so I'm not sure. I don't know why there's any room for optimism that your party will be, quote-unquote, recovered to the extent that it ever had any moral standing.
And by the way, I don't have optimism. Okay? I don't, to be clear. But God has put me on this planet to suffer, and he has, he's ordained me with terrible purpose, which is effectively the arguments and the principles of the Republican Party, which may have never been fulfilled. Maybe it's all a mythos. Maybe it's all a mythology to get for people to vote for representatives who reduce tax cuts. But allegedly, there were people in our country who believed in representative democracy. There were people who sincerely believed in the Constitution of the United States. There were people who believed in entrepreneurialism and capitalism as vehicles for prosperity. And there were people who believed, weirdly enough, Richard Nixon, Teddy Roosevelt, they believed in being stewards of a republic in order to pass on the environmental and cultural heritage of the United States to the next generation and making the country better than when they inherited it themselves. So this might all be mythos. It literally could all be fucking, every single person in politics has been a sociopathic Machiavellian sack of shit appealing to this mythos in order to secure votes. That's entirely possible. But I would rather live and die with principles rather than giving into the post-truth tribalist national conservative sludge that has infected and destroyed the right wing. So win, lose, or draw, it's a fight that I think I need to fight, even if it's just for personal reasons.
Yeah, but Vance isn't on your lists of people who would be a continuation of MAGA, and I'll never understand that.
He would be. And actually, I do want to point this out before we wrap. So Soy Pill said, oh, well, Connor said that he would consider voting for Vance. He left out my caveats, which is effectively like he's riding a horse on the road to Damascus. He's struck by blinding light from God. He realizes that the past decade of politics was a mistake, and he returns to the 2015, 2016 never Trump Republican who actually has principles. He left out the fact that he would have to have that road to Damascus spiritual moment in order for me to vote for Vance. And also the fact that I think the chances of him having that moment is the same chances of a snowball continuing to exist in hell for more than a quarter of a second. So the chances of a Vance vote is the same chance of a snowball existing in hell.
But you would vote for him over
just what I
AOC.
wish would happen. What's that?
but you would vote for him without the come to Jesus moment over AOC. I think. Maybe I'm wrong
depends
about
on
that.
how much Hasan Piker is a part of the campaign, right? so if that actually takes it all the way back to the beginning of the conversation.
Okay.
If AOC is like, Hasan Piker's my best friend, we're gonna create a multipolar world with China and Russia. I am committing on the campaign trail to transfer all our industrial and military industrial secrets to our rivals in order to achieve a more stable geopolitical world. And realistically, I think this social democratic shit is for pussies. I believe in the decommodification of basic human needs and workers owning the means of production. And I actually have a portion of the military. I've dyed my hair blonde. I've put in blue contacts. And I have huge tits. I'm going to show off the entire time. And so as a result, I've seduced the American military into supporting my socialist agenda. So I will be able to implement the decommodification of basic human needs and workers owning the means of production. Then at that point, you're right. I will vote for JD Vance over Aryan AOC.
Thank you for that acknowledgement. But Connor, as always, a fantastic conversation. We really appreciate you. And
I had a blast.
Everyone follow Connor. And,
I wanted to throw elbows and yell, but I was also in an incredible good mood. And you were, I don't want to say that you're insane all the time, but
because people have been offended on my behalf
today. I'll say
people have been offended on my behalf for that implication, but I appreciate you saying that.
Yes.
All right.
Well, you have a beautiful day, King. I'm looking forward to the next one in a week or two.
All right. See you later, man.
Bye.